On Tech News Today, the Mac turns 30, Facebook turns the tables on Princeton, and Sony wants to turn your TV into a makeup mirror. All that and more coming up next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's Friday, January 24th, 2014, and this is Tech News Today. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgan.
I'm Sarah Lane.
And I'm Jason Howell.
Tech News Today explores the top tech news in 30 minutes or less. Today is the Macintosh's 30th birthday, no longer in its late 20s. The Apple website homepage is showing an interactive timeline of the history of the Mac plus a video, and they added a Your First Mac page where readers are asked to talk about their first experience with the Apple Macintosh. Joining us today are Harry McCracken, the editor-at-large for Time, and Andy Ihnatko, the technology journalist for the Chicago Sun-Times and a host of Twit's Mac Break Weekly. Both Harry and Andy are frequent guests on Twit. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Well, the Macintosh turns 30 today, but so does the IBM portable computer. The company Dell turns 30. What is it about the Mac that is worth remembering where other technologies and companies and products are not? Harry, what do you think?
I think those computers are also worth remembering, but to me, the most interesting thing about the Mac is not that it was really influential in 1984. It's that it's continued to be influential ever since. There really are not all that many machines from that time in PC history that outlasted the 80s, and the Mac is still with us. And when you look at Windows systems, they're still knocking it off in a lot of ways. To have that happen for 3 decades is really a singular achievement.
Now, there's a conventional wisdom, Andy, that the original Mac kind of stole its best ideas from Xerox PARC. Do you think that's accurate, or is that a load of baloney?
Yeah, from a legal point of view, it's certainly baloney. They did for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the ideas that were at Xerox PARC weren't necessarily invented at whole cloth at Xerox PARC. These were ideas that had been discussed in the industry and by researchers for years and years and years before then. There's the Stanford lecture, I think, that's called the greatest demo of all time, in which pretty much everything that we came to know in the early 80s and early and late 80s about computing was demonstrated before it was really practical. So that's really was where the Macintosh team was already going, and the reason why Steve Jobs got that tour of Xerox PARC was for 2 specific reasons that kind of negate that argument. Number one, that was part of the deal where there was a legal agreement that said that in exchange for certain considerations, Apple gets a tour of Xerox PARC, and Apple gets to use any cool stuff that they seem to find there. And the reason why they had to go back a second time was because the Mac team had told Steve, this is what you need to ask for, because we want to get access to this specific technology that we think that they're working on. And they didn't actually show Steve that stuff, although they were legally required to show him basically whatever he wanted to. So they had to go back a second time to look at the good stuff. So again, these were ideas that were already in development by pretty much everybody. And also, whatever they took from Xerox, they had the right to get. So that's not thievery in any way, shape, or form.
Andy, you probably read the Malcolm Gladwell article in the New Yorker a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, called The Tweaker, about Steve Jobs and the invention of the mouse and what the relationship was between Xerox PARC and the mouse. Essentially, the article said that he didn't say, copy this mouse. He said, here is a mouse. Make sure it's unlike this mouse in every single way. I want it to be cheap. I want it to be easy to use. I want it to have one button. And it was a laundry list of ways in which he wanted to upgrade, improve, and essentially not be the Xerox mouse. Do you think that applies to other aspects of the Xerox PARC technology that influenced Apple?
Yeah, I would say so. I used the Xerox Star, which is the usual machine that's cited as the inspiration for all this technology. And you can see certain basic fundamental DNA, just like you can look at you can look at a squirrel and see that, okay, the squirrel has an eye here and here, and the squirrel has 5 fingers on the hands and the toes. But the human beings tend to diverge kind of wildly from that. As though someone said, wow, this 5 fingers and 5 toes, that's a great idea, but here's how we would want to do it for our product. So there's certainly, I think that in general, as technology gets developed, this is a commonly recurring theme where you will see a designer or developer will see something in the flesh, and that will shape their thinking about where they want to take their own thing in their own direction. So it's one thing to look at a mouse and see a mouse working, and another thing to simply say, we want to build us one of those. That's certainly not what the Mac design team did. It was one of the subtle breakthroughs of the Mac was recognizing that the average person is not the average user, the average business user is not going to figure out a multitude of buttons and this complicated interaction between the mouse and the screen. You need one button, and you also need to force them to use it so that they get over their hang up that I should be doing everything via the keyboard. There are a lot of reasons why the mouse worked on the Mac and it didn't work on previous computers.
Berkeley Steven in the chat room says that keep in mind that Steve Jobs got investment from Xerox, and so technically he was paid to steal ideas. It's also a good point that, you know, people talk about Xerox having no vision. At least investing in Apple to a certain extent was somewhat vaguely visionary. Harry, you wrote an interesting article called 20 Ways Apple's Mac Changed Everything. Can you give us a few of those ways?
Sure, and I tried to focus on ones beyond the initial stuff that people know about, like the graphical user interface and the mouse and the laser pointer. If you look at modern laptops, really a huge percentage of the ideas in them originated on the Mac. It was the first portable computer with a pointing device built in, originally a trackball and later a touchpad and that nice wrist rest area. So most of that evolution happened on the Mac. QuickTime is a technology that Apple came up with during the time that Steve Jobs wasn't there. And you know, full motion video, as we know it today, really originated with that, and MPEG-4 is based on some of the QuickTime technology. So without that, you know, YouTube and Netflix might not have happened in the way they did as quickly as they did. Bluetooth is another one. We think of Bluetooth today as something that's used primarily with mobile devices, and when it first came out more than 10 years ago, it was in a few phones, and essentially the only thing you could do with them was make them talk to your Mac because Apple supported it.
Apple was also very aggressive in getting Bluetooth 4.0 or low energy out there very, very early on both the MacBooks and also the mobile devices. Harry, Apple is asking people about their first Mac experience. Can you tell me about yours?
Sure. Well, at the time the Mac came out, I was still sort of a TRS-80 holdback. So I watched the launch with interest but did not have one. And the first time I got my hands on one was, I think, about 3 years later when my mother, who worked at Boston University, got one from work. And I spent more time on it than she did. I used PageMaker a lot and bulletin board systems and so forth. And then I, like a lot of people, I kind of moved away from the Mac for a long time until 2004, when after a long time of using Windows PCs, I came back to it.
How about you, Andy? Tell us about your first Mac experience.
I remember it was a couple of months after the original launch, but I was a big Apple II guy, and I was a subscriber to Soft Talk magazine and Byte magazine, so obviously I've been reading about this ungodly expensive machine that, of course, I, with my paper route, would never, ever afford. And I finally got to use it for the first time when a computer store that was maybe about a quarter mile away from the big multiplex movie theater where I'd seen all the George Lucas movies, that they finally got in Macs. So I remember on a stiflingly hot day, went into the computer store, partly for the air conditioning, saw the Mac, and that was it was for a guy who was spending, a kid coming home straight from school and going right behind his Apple IIe to write code, even that blew me away. Because the things that I noticed was the fact was, you're going to think I'm exaggerating, but I was just blown away by, oh my God, the dots on the screen have corners to them. They're not just like blobby dots of light. And I remember, and the first time you are moving a physical object on a desk and you're seeing a concurrent object moving and responding to your actual real world movements, that blew me away. Even the noises that the disk drive was making, because one of my favorite things about the Apple II was the fact that I really absolutely owned the disk drive. So I wrote like new operating systems to like control the stepper motors. I knew everything, every wheeze, every grind that those machines made, and every like click and every noise it made was giving me information on, you know, how to break the copy protection on Electronic Arts games. Let's pass over that. But the fact that this machine made no noise whatsoever, just a little when it had to read something from disk. the entire experience just made me think that I don't know who I'm going to have to work for, kill, or lie to one day own one of these machines, but dash darn it, I will own one of these machines someday.
Sounds like something right out of Wayne's World. Oh, yes, you will be mine.
There was about as much elegance and dignity to my reaction as it was to Wayne and Garth's.
Well, you can find Harry McCracken on his Technologizer blog at time.com and Andy Ihnatko on his Celestial Waste of Bandwidth blog at ihnatko.com. It's spelled just like it sounds. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, Sarah, there's a little war that broke out between Princeton University and Facebook. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so Princeton published a paper last week that said that Facebook was bound to lose 80% of its users in just the next few years. And a lot of people said, that's crazy. Yesterday, Facebook ended up striking back. A little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, but it's based on the same type of research that Princeton used initially. The social giant said in a mock study that Princeton will also lose all of its students by 2021. If you're not familiar with the story yet, what the study did was compared Facebook almost like a disease. And not in the way that it's bad for you, but in the way that it spreads virally among users. You've got a core number of users, and all of a sudden, it's an epidemic. But that eventually, the users who had spread it in the first place end up moving on, or dying, or that sort of thing. And so it's the kind of disease that eventually dies out, almost like an organic disease. Now, what it also said is that Facebook has already reached the peak of its popularity and has entered a decline phase. So maybe even take the comparison to being sick out of it. That was the point of the Princeton study. Now, what's interesting, though, about it is that it's based on a decline of searches in Google for the word Facebook. Now, you might say, that's crazy. How could you predict anything just based on Google searches? But it's the same method that if you use for MySpace and you kind of turn it into a graph, a curve, you do see quite a drop-off. So this is a little bit of prediction and a little bit of, hey, we actually can point this to another social network that eventually failed, even though it was extremely popular at one point. Well, Facebook data scientist Mike Devlin said, okay, well, I'm going to use the same methodology for Princeton. And it turns out that by 2018, you will have half of your enrollment. And by 2021, no students at all. So it's a little silly. But
Google actually got bit by a similar flaw in reasoning when they publish predictions about the flu season based on Google searches. And recently, I think a couple of years ago or last year, they predicted a huge flu season because everybody was searching for flu, and it didn't happen. The assumption there was that when people start getting symptoms, they go to Google and search for the symptoms, or they search for information about the flu. Turns out that the media was having one of its ridiculous overhyping trends, and they all pile on in a war with readers to scare and alarm everybody. And that's all it was. It was a spike in media generated hype about the flu that had nothing to do with an actual flu virus. So this is a similar thing. You can't know about the world by studying Google searches. What you can know is how people are being influenced or manipulated in some way or another to go search for one thing or another.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the searches are happening, but it's not necessarily the most obvious reason.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you know, Justin Bieber isn't the biggest superstar in the world. Maybe he is, but he's in the news for reasons that have nothing to do with anything you might associate with those with that spike in searches. The Princeton study was flawed essentially because just because past social networks look like, in some superficial way, like a virus in the way that they rise and then fall. The difference is that viruses don't have human intelligence, and Facebook will always adapt with reason, with experimentation, in ways that are sort of beyond biology to try to counter any sort of decline that is happening or may happen in the future. And so that, you know, in the Facebook study itself, though, or the Facebook sort of humorous, tongue-in-cheek response itself was kind of flawed because, in fact, every previous #1 social network has declined, and universities don't really like 268-year-old universities tend to be less likely to decline than social networks do. So it's all, you know, and again, they weren't truly serious. They were trying to point out the flaws, but I do think that Facebook countered this in part because they feel vulnerable. They actually do fear a serious decline.
Well, they also have, even Facebook itself has said, it was back in October, acknowledged that they were declining among the younger set, the teenage Facebook users, because there's just, if you're getting onto a social network for the first time, all of a sudden you are legally allowed to have a Facebook account, but you have other options. That is a real thing. Now, it's probably not so doomsday as the Princeton study wants you to believe, but the younger set that you would like to be on Facebook so that you've got a Facebook customer for life might not be there anymore.
That's right. Younger people aren't just leaving. They're leaving to go to simpler, more single-purpose sites that specifically don't have their parents and grandparents and everybody else that they know, and maybe people in their 20s, their coworkers aren't on there. I think sites like Snapchat and so on. And that's why Facebook is working hard to create Facebook versions of almost all of those sites. They're creating their Messenger standalone. They created their Messenger standalone app to capture the people who are going to like WhatsApp type of applications. They created Poke to counter Snapchat. They see people going to Instagram, so they just bought Instagram. And Zuckerberg has promised that there are going to be a lot more standalone apps in the future. They're also working behind the scenes to create Google-like algorithm magic for serving up super relevant ads. So far, their ads are super not relevant, I think. And you know, Google's aren't perfect either, but both those companies are headed for a world where they both have lots and lots of services, lots and lots of products. They're all linked together with social. They all harvest your personal data and apply that personal data harvested everywhere to each and every one of their little apps. And so, yeah, I don't see them behaving like a virus, and I don't see them going away anytime soon. They're working hard to prevent their decline.
I think having a suite of standalone apps is the right idea for Facebook. I mean, there are probably some people out there who say, you know, Facebook owns Instagram, therefore I don't use Instagram. But there are a lot of people who say, you know, Facebook as a whole, I'm not going to buy into that whole thing, but I like Instagram.
That's
well,
exactly
Facebook still gets all that ad revenue, same company.
That's right. They don't care. And users don't really care who owns what, I think. If they like Instagram, they like Instagram, and who cares that Facebook owns it or doesn't own it? It doesn't matter. People just want the service that feels right to them. Well, Sony may turn your TV into a mirror for putting on makeup. And no, I'm not making this up. The company has a patent for a TV set that was published recently that actually turns the TV into a bona fide makeup mirror. The idea is that you push a button and the TV goes into makeup mode, the camera turns on, but it reverses the image, so you actually have literally a mirror image that's presented through video. But instead of showing the background of your house or wherever it is the TV is, it turns it all white. It identifies the difference between the person, the user, and the environment, and it turns the environment white. And the white light is very important, and in the whole point of this patent and this technology, because most people who put on makeup don't have the kind of light that enables them to know what colors they're using when they step outside into the true bright lights of the sun or wherever it is they're going to be. So this TV will use the TV's brightness and technology to provide the right true colors so people can put up a makeup. It's not clear whether they want to turn TVs into places to put on makeup or they want to turn mirrors into TVs. For example, you can imagine this in the bathroom. Instead of a mirror, you'd have a TV screen, and it's a mirror when you want a mirror, and then it turns into a screen when you want some...
I always want it to be a mirror in the bathroom. That's just something I need it to always be. However, part of it could maybe be a television. I like the idea of it being able to say, hey, give this quadrant, you know, some real estate for CNN or whatever. I will say it's true that in the wrong light, makeup application, I should know a thing or two about this, can be disastrous. So I like the idea of this. Putting makeup aside, though, for a second, because it's like this just isn't the sort of technology that's going to appeal to a lot of folks. A lot of people don't wear makeup, men and women. But the idea that it could sort of turn into the future of what web video might look like is interesting for a couple reasons, because it'll make everybody look better, but it's going to make the environments all look pretty much the same. And then it turns into, well, we live in an age where here on Twit we have a lot of remote hosts. Is everyone going to kind of look like they're in the same sort of weird little angelic closet? I mean, I guess if the lighting looks great, maybe we don't care.
Everyone will look like one of those Apple promotional videos with Johnny Ive talking in the White Room.
We won't have to care so much about, well, am I near a window? Is the lighting good in here? It'll all sort of be worked out for us.
We'll all start saying aluminium.
That's
for
right.
instance.
I think
Yes.
they patented that as well.
Aluminum.
It's
Yep.
excellent technology. Well, Google's been spanked in court again. What's going on there?
Yeah, so a German court has ordered Google to block sex pictures involving Formula One boss Max Mosley because although Google had not taken the pictures, the court ruled it was responsible as a distributor of those images. The pictures were taken from a video that was filmed by the News of the World, no longer in print tabloid, and then uploaded to the web back in 2008. This block follows a French case that ended up with Google also being ordered to remove links to those same pictures. Google says it will appeal the latest ruling. Now, Google's argument is, well, we don't police content. We don't want to start policing content. That's all we would do if that was the sort of job that we had to do. Though the company says it has deleted over 100 links to this Mosley incident and just can't keep up because it's not in the business of doing this sort of thing. The court says, quote, the court is of the opinion that the banned pictures of the plaintiff severely violate his private sphere as they show him active in sexual practices. Okay, well, that's a very gray area, right? Because this is somebody that you could say is more in the public eye than the average person. But what if the average person has the same issue and ends up not being able to get a job for this reason? This sets a precedent that is I mean, again, this is country specific. This is, limited to Europe at this point. But what are the implications? If I say, well, hold on a second, that's my private sphere. I don't like what's on the internet, and Google should be able to take these links down. Well, then what happens?
That's exactly right. And Google is a little disingenuous about this. In fact, they do check for and change what's displayed and what's linked to. Child pornography, they go after that. On YouTube, for example, if we were to violate their terms of service by just showing somebody else's content, they would remove this video, which will be posted on YouTube. They do that automatically, and they have, the assumption, the process is that they take it down first and ask questions later, and you have to appeal, and it's this big, painful process. So, in fact, they do this. The other point to be considered is that this is a global problem for Google because every single region, every single country has its own sensitivities. There are certain sensitivities in Muslim countries where, Google or YouTube or some other Google property is being blocked or brought down, or they're dragged into court because they're displaying something that it goes after the particular sensitivities of that country. In Germany, for example, and this is the accusation here was that Max Mosley was at a Nazi-themed orgy with prostitutes. He said, yeah, it was an orgy with prostitutes, but it wasn't Nazi-themed. And in Germany, they're very sensitive about anything relating to Nazi things. In the United States, there's all kinds of hate speech and groups, and they're free to have swastikas and all that kind of thing. In Germany, you can't show, in France, to a certain extent, you can't show swastikas, you can't show Nazi-themed things. And so every country has its sensitivities. Google used to censor content. Who knows? Maybe they still do, for the Chinese Communist Party, which used to. There was 5 years ago, if you search for Tiananmen Square in the United States and search for it in China, in China it was all tourists like walking around in the peaceful Tiananmen Square. In the United States, it was all tanks and things like that. So the fact is that they are in the business of automatically detecting what's in pictures, what are on the other side of links, and they have reasons. Sometimes they're Google's reasons, sometimes they're somebody else's reasons, but if Google wants to be an international player in a world in which people have legal systems where they can bring them to court, they're going to be doing this. They don't want to do it. I know they don't want to do it, but they're going to do it. So I think this whole process is here to stay for them.
Well, we'll see what happens with Google's appeal. I'm sure the company is not being disingenuous when it says that it will. But yeah, I think you're right, particularly in the countries in question. The fact that there was a part of the story that ends up not being true, or at least claimed to not be true, makes it a very different story.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, don't you hate smartphone bloatware that you can't delete? I certainly do.
Yes.
And so does the South Korean government, apparently. Any pre-installed software on phones must now be deletable by users, according to new guidelines that actually go into effect in April. The rules affect phones made by Samsung and LG, two of the world's biggest brands. I don't think this is going to apply to smartphones that are sold abroad. I don't think that's going to apply to our Samsung phones that we buy. I think this is just for the nation of Korea, and it also covers telecoms. But should it be? Should there be? You know, should governments ban carriers and handset makers from putting bloatware on phones that you can't?
Well, they're not banning the carriers, right? They're saying the customer should have the option to go back to some sort of a stock model. I mean, in the case, let's call it the Android operating system, you know, just as an example. So, okay, if I live in South Korea, I get a new phone, it's made by either Samsung or LG, and I say, okay, it's this personalized experience of Android, but I just want the regular Android. Then I have the option to take out all the bells and whistles. I think I want that option. I think that's a good thing for the customer.
I want the option too. Should governments be the ones who are enforcing that? I'm not so sure. And speaking of bloatware, I'd like to see the option to remove bloatware on, you know, other devices like laptops, and I'd certainly like the option to remove some of the Apple products or icons that you can't currently remove.
Well, if the government isn't going to do it, the carriers certainly aren't going to. I mean, their bloatware is on there for a reason. They want to differentiate themselves from other manufacturers. Jason, I mean, I know on All About Android, you cover the idea of different models of Android all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how I feel about a government coming in and saying you have to do this as far as this is concerned, because I think at least here in the U.S., it's a free market, and you know, if enough people really have a problem with this, then they don't buy the phones that have the bloatware, and then that's a signal to the companies to not put it on there. Are we there? No, because most people are probably going to put up with it, and some people actually like it. Some people actually like the extra features and services that end up coming with a Samsung or an LG or whatever, you know, they end up loading on the phone. People use it. Personally, I don't, but I have a choice. I bought a Nexus, and the Nexus doesn't have that. In the case of Android, you do have choices if you don't want that. So I'm not sure how I feel about a government coming in and saying, this is what you have to do, and ruling that.
It has to be said also that that the law is more of a guideline. It's not really clear how strongly they'll enforce it. And it also doesn't apply to Wi-Fi apps, NFC apps, customer service center apps, and the App Store app itself. Again, those are all exempted from this ruling. Well, Sarah, everybody talks about link bait headlines like BuzzFeed and Upworthy, but it sounds like somebody's finally doing something about it.
Yeah, if you're tired of those link bait headlines that say something like, this woman got a Macintosh and what she does next will amaze you, you might like this browser plugin. It claims to automatically transform those viral headlines into what they actually mean. So it works by finding words that are link bait words like, oh, I don't know, incredible or amazing or fascinating, and then changes those words to make them more accurate. For example, the word incredible is then changed to painfully ordinary. All right, I'm not the biggest BuzzFeed hater in the world, I will say. They seem to know what I want. There was an article yesterday about 26 cats that were photographed in mid-sneeze. Can't say I didn't enjoy it. But yes, in general, we've gotten to the point where link bait headlines have gone too far. So it's called Downworthy. It's the name of the plugin.
Great name.
You going to install it?
Great name. I think I probably will, just to try it for a while. And, you know, everybody picks on Buzzworthy. I mean, sorry, Upworthy. And
that's a good one.
And BuzzFeed.
Buzzworthy.
Yeah, they're going to merge. That would be a great name, Buzzworthy. And it's probably true. Some of that stuff is Buzzworthy. But everybody's jumping on the bandwagon now. Even Slate is using Upworthy-like headlines. Everybody's using headlines that don't give you the information. They tease you and want you to, you know, and I fall for it all the time.
Me too.
If somebody gives me the information about what the story's about, I'm like, eh. But if it's like, you'll never believe what's happening, and they don't tell you, I'm like, well, it could be really good. And I find myself falling for it all the time.
Well, that's the thing. And sometimes it is really good, but it was manipulative at the same time.
Yeah, it was.
Do you remember there was I don't know, this was last year, I think, there was a plugin that allowed any baby photos in your newsfeed on Facebook to be replaced with something else, like a car or a cat, or there was the same idea. You know, it's like, take charge of your internet experience. Don't let them tell you what you want.
And I hope that the chat room will come up with a show title today that is either Upworthy or Downworthy. Come on, blow us away. You can do it. Give us a BuzzFeed
or Buzzworthy.
Headline. Yes, the Buzzworthy. That's all our show. Send email to us at tnt@twit.tv. Call us at 260-TNT-SHOW and leave a message. And check out our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com and our Tech News Today Google Plus community. Don't forget to subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy birthday, Apple Macintosh, and we'll see you Monday.